It began like something out of a movie, a man who rose from poverty to power, only to fall from grace in front of the entire world. Eric Adams, once hailed as the people's mayor of New York City, stood before flashing cameras, accused of crimes that shocked the nation: bribery, fraud, conspiracy. The same man who once wore the NYPD badge with pride was now the subject of federal indictment. How did it come to this? How did a boy from Brooklyn who dreamed of changing the system end up accused of using that same system for personal gain? Before we dive into the fall, let's rewind to the rise. Because to understand the tragedy of Eric Adams, you have to first understand the man himself. And hey, if you love real-life crime stories like this, stories that show how power, ambition, and corruption often dance together, make sure you subscribe to my YouTube channel. You don't want to miss what's coming next. By subscribing, you motivate us to work even harder to bring more stories to life. Eric Leroy Adams was born in Brooklyn, New York in 1960. His childhood was far from easy. His mother, Dorothy, worked as a house cleaner. His father, a butcher. The family of 6 struggled in a cramped apartment where every dollar mattered. As a teenager, Eric was no stranger to hardship or danger. At age 15, he and his brother were arrested for trespassing, and that arrest changed everything. According to Adams, the police officers who arrested them beat him so badly that he still remembered the pain decades later. But that moment didn't break him. It fueled him. He promised himself that one day he'd wear the same badge, not to oppress, but to reform. That vow shaped his life. By the early 1980s, Eric Adams had joined the New York City Transit Police. He was sharp, disciplined, and ambitious. He rose through the ranks quickly, eventually becoming a captain in the NYPD. But even as a cop, he was never quiet. He spoke openly about racism in law enforcement and the mistreatment of black officers. He co-founded 100 Blacks in Law Enforcement Who Care, a group that publicly criticized police brutality and racial profiling. It was a bold move, and it made enemies. But for many New Yorkers, Eric was a voice of truth. To them, he wasn't just another officer. He was a fighter for justice, a man unafraid to challenge the very system he served. In the early 2000s, after more than 2 decades on the force, Adams retired from the NYPD and turned to politics. His next mission: change the system from the inside. And for a while, it seemed like he was doing exactly that. In 2006, he was elected to the New York State Senate, representing Brooklyn's 20th District. His rise was fast and impressive. In Albany, he talked about fairness, education, and reform. He presented himself as a bridge between the streets and the state, between the people and the politicians. He was smart, media-savvy, and confident. The kind of politician who could walk into a room full of skeptics and walk out with applause. But even then, there were whispers about campaign money that came from strange places, about favors that seemed a little too convenient, about friendships with business people who later wanted something in return. At the time, it was just talk, nothing proven, nothing concrete. People brushed it off. After all, politics and rumor go hand in hand. When Adams became Brooklyn Borough President in 2014, it felt like the next logical step in his career. He had charisma, energy, and a story that inspired millions. He talked about affordable housing, public health, and plant-based diets, even crediting veganism for reversing his diabetes. To everyday New Yorkers, he was a symbol of possibility, a man who had come from nothing and made it to the top through grit and determination. But power has a way of changing people. Behind the public speeches and photo ops, something darker was taking shape. According to federal prosecutors years later, this was a period when Eric Adams began building a network of donors and favors that would eventually come back to haunt him. Luxury trips, expensive dinners, quiet meetings behind closed doors. It wasn't that Adams was rich. Far from it. But power attracts wealth, and wealth attracts temptation. He became close with foreign business leaders, including Turkish officials who admired his influence and his role as a black political leader in a global city. In time, these connections would form the center of a scandal that would shake New York City to its core. But at that moment, in the mid-2010s, Eric Adams looked unstoppable. By 2021, his dream came true. He was elected as the 110th mayor of New York City, the first former police officer to hold a position in decades, the second black mayor in the city's history. He stood on stage, waving to cheering crowds. Reporters shouted questions. Cameras flashed. He smiled and said, "New York belongs to people again." It was a statement full of pride and promise, but also, perhaps, irony, because before long, those same people would feel betrayed by the man who claimed to be one of them. As mayor, Adams pushed for law and order, public safety, and housing reform. He promised to clean up the streets and restore faith in leadership. But while he preached discipline to others, investigators say his own conduct told a different story. The first signs came quietly. An odd donation here, an unregistered foreign contact there, a few travel expenses that didn't quite add up. By 2024, those small cracks had become fractures, and soon everything would collapse. Before we continue, if you're following this story so far, don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel for more true crime stories like this. I post every week, uncovering real cases that change history. Because what's coming next will take us deep inside the federal investigation that turned Eric Adams from a mayor into a suspect. It's a story of power, money, and betrayal, and how even the most respected figures can lose everything in the blink of an eye. The storm that would eventually destroy Eric Adams' career didn't arrive all at once. It started as whispers in the halls of City Hall, quiet rumors that something wasn't right with the mayor's fundraising network. At first, no one dared say much. After all, Eric Adams was the mayor of New York City, the man who had promised to restore the city's strength after years of division. But deep inside the walls of federal law enforcement, a quiet investigation was beginning to form. The FBI had questions. In early 2024, federal investigators noticed something odd in Adams's campaign donations. A pattern. Money was flowing in from sources that didn't make sense. Small checks from shell companies, individuals who had no real connection to New York, and even contributions that appeared to be linked to Turkish organizations. At first glance, it didn't seem like much. Politicians received donations from everywhere. But when agents dug deeper, they found emails, receipts, and messages that painted a disturbing picture. According to court documents later unsealed, federal prosecutors alleged that Eric Adams and several of his aides had solicited illegal campaign donations from foreign nationals, particularly from individuals connected to the Turkish government, in exchange for favors and expedited city approvals. The most explosive claim was that Adams helped fast-track the construction approval of a new Turkish consulate building in Manhattan, even when city fire inspectors raised safety concerns. If true, that meant a sitting mayor had placed political favors over public safety. And as the months went on, the evidence only grew stronger. Still, Adams appeared calm in public. He smiled at press conferences, joked with reporters, and attended charity dinners. He acted like a man who had nothing to fear. But behind the scenes, federal agents were watching everything, his calls, his texts, even his private meetings. In August 2024, the first major sign of trouble hit the headlines. Federal agents raided the homes and offices of several Adams campaign staffers. Boxes of documents, laptops, and phones were seized. The mayor tried to stay composed. At a press conference, he said, "I've always followed the law. I welcome any review. My team and I have nothing to hide." The crowd of reporters shouted questions, but Adams smiled and walked away. It was the calm before the storm. A few weeks later, the story exploded. On September 26, 2024, the U.S. Attorney's Office announced that Mayor Eric Adams had been indicted on charges of bribery, wire fraud, and conspiracy. The accusations were shocking. Adams allegedly accepted free travel, luxury gifts, and campaign donations in exchange for political favors. According to prosecutors, these gifts included first-class flights to Turkey, 5-star hotel stays, and even expensive watches and electronics. The indictment claimed that between 2014 and 2021, while serving as Brooklyn Borough President and later as Mayor, Adams knowingly and willfully participated in a scheme to defraud the public of his honest services. The phrase honest services struck a chord. It meant the government believed he had betrayed the very people who trusted him most, the citizens of New York. That night, New York City felt like it had stopped breathing. The same man who had once stood as a symbol of integrity and reform was now painted as the face of corruption. The reactions were mixed. Some said it was a witch hunt. Others said it was justice long overdue. On social media, old supporters turned against him. His political allies grew quiet. The late-night comedians mocked him mercilessly. Still, Adams refused to back down. "I am innocent," he declared. "I will fight this with every ounce of strength I have." He hired a team of top defense lawyers. He held his head high at public appearances. But the damage was done. Public trust began to crumble. Approval ratings plummeted. Protesters gathered outside City Hall holding signs that read, "No one is above the law." Eric Adams betrayed New York. The tragedy wasn't just in the charges. It was in the story itself. This was a man who had once inspired people to believe in second chances. A man who had risen from nothing to the top of the biggest city in America. A man who told young people that discipline, courage, and honesty could change lives. Now, he stood accused of being everything he swore to fight against. The court hearings were grueling. The media swarmed every courthouse entrance. Every day brought new headlines, new revelations, and new shame. Former aides were called to testify. Bank statements were revealed. Emails surfaced showing discussions about campaign support from Turkish donors. The prosecutors said it was proof. Adams's defense called it misunderstanding. But the pressure was unbearable. City agencies began to distance themselves. Endorsements disappeared. Even longtime friends stopped returning his calls. New York's mayor, once celebrated as a symbol of justice, was now the center of a scandal that had captured the world's attention. And as the legal war dragged on, Adams began to isolate himself. He spent more time at Gracie Mansion, the official mayor's residence, often seen walking alone at night, deep in thought. In public, he still smiled. But those who worked closely with him said the weight of it all was eating him alive. He had always prided himself on being tough, a former cop, a fighter. But this time, the enemy wasn't on the streets. It was in the mirror. The tragedy of Eric Adams was no longer just political. It was deeply personal. He had lost the city's trust, and soon he would lose even more. Before we continue where the courtroom drama unfolds and shocking new secrets come to light, make sure to subscribe to my YouTube channel if you haven't already. I share the full stories behind real-life cases like this, told simply and powerfully, so everyone can understand how truth and tragedy collide. The next part of the story will take you inside the courtroom, where Eric Adams' public defense turns into a desperate fight for his name, his career, and his freedom. The air inside the federal courthouse in Lower Manhattan was tense. Reporters filled every seat, cameras waited outside, and the people of New York held their breath. Eric Adams, the 110th mayor of New York City, was about to face the biggest fight of his life. The indictment against him had shaken the country. Federal prosecutors accused him of bribery, wire fraud, and conspiracy. Serious charges that carried the possibility of years in prison if convicted. But Adams continued to insist that he was innocent. He called the accusations baseless. A political attack meant to destroy his reputation. This wasn't just a legal battle. It was a battle for his legacy. Federal investigators had spent years tracing campaign donations and travel records. They claimed Adams and his aides had accepted illegal contributions from foreign nationals, including individuals connected to the Turkish government, during both his time as Brooklyn Borough President and later as mayor. The alleged goal? To secure political favors, including expedited approval for construction of the new Turkish consulate building in Manhattan, despite safety concerns raised by fire inspectors. The indictment also mentioned luxury perks. Business-class flights to Turkey, expensive hotel stays, designer gifts, and campaign donations funneled through shell companies. In court, prosecutors argued that Adams had violated the public's trust by trading influence for personal benefit. The people of New York City deserve a mayor who worked for them, the lead prosecutor said. Instead, they got one who worked for himself. The evidence included emails and text messages between Adams's campaign team and individuals linked to Turkish organizations. One email showed Adams thanking a donor for their continued support and partnership. Another referenced expedited processes for friends overseas. The prosecution said these weren't coincidences. They were part of a pattern. Adams's defense team pushed back hard. They argued that he had never personally requested or accepted a bribe. Yes, he had traveled to Turkey and met with foreign officials, but those trips, they said, were part of his duties as a public servant promoting international business and cultural ties. The defense claimed the donations were lawful and properly reported under campaign finance rules. They portrayed Adams as a target, a black mayor from humble beginnings, unfairly scrutinized by powerful interests who never wanted him in office. There is no smoking gun, his lawyer told the court. There is no cash in envelopes, no secret bank accounts. What there is a man who worked tirelessly for his city and is now being punished for it. For a while, it seemed like the defense was holding its ground. Adams remained composed, even smiling occasionally in the courtroom. He still walked into City Hall every morning, determined to project strength. But behind that calm face, pressure was building. Outside the courthouse, New Yorkers were divided. Some stood with signs reading "Justice for Adams" and "Let the man do his job." Others shouted, "Resign now," and "No more corruption." Opinion polls showed his approval rating plummeting. Within months, he dropped below 25%, one of the lowest for any modern New York mayor. Even within his own administration, cracks appeared. Some top aides resigned quietly. Others distanced themselves publicly. City agencies began to stall on his initiatives, and political allies stopped showing up to press events. The city that once celebrated his rise now watched his downfall in disbelief. Adams often told his staff, "I'll be proven right in the end." But privately, he was exhausted. His once booming public image was collapsing, and every move he made was dissected by the media. Then came an unexpected twist. In April 2025, the U.S. Department of Justice, now under new administration, filed a motion to dismiss the case. The news stunned everyone. After months of investigation, federal prosecutors abruptly asked the court to drop all charges against Mayor Adams. They offered no detailed explanation, only citing matters of prosecutorial discretion. The presiding judge reluctantly agreed, but noted in his official statement that the dismissal smacks of a bargain, dismissal of the indictment in exchange for political concessions. It was one of the most controversial decisions of the year. To his supporters, it was vindication. "See," they said, "he was innocent all along." To his critics, it was proof of corruption, not of Adams, but of the system that let him go. The scandal deepened the public's distrust in government. For months, political commentators debated whether the dismissal was legitimate or politically motivated. Adams, meanwhile, celebrated the ruling publicly. He called it a victory for truth and fairness. But his reputation had already taken a permanent hit. He returned to his mayoral duties. But things were never the same. City council members challenged him openly. Funding partners withdrew support. Even friendly media outlets stopped defending him. The man who once promised to rebuild New York with integrity was now seen by many as a symbol of broken trust. Before we continue, if you're following the story so far, make sure to like this video and subscribe to my YouTube channel for more real-life true crime stories that show how power and choices can change everything. Next, we'll explore the aftermath, how Eric Adams tried to hold on to his political life, how the city reacted, and how the tragedy finally came full circle. By 2025, the ripples of the legal storm surrounding Eric Adams had turned into a tsunami. Public trust, once his greatest asset, had eroded. While the indictment was only an allegation, the fact of the case painted a serious picture. In the wake of the charges, calls for Adams's resignation grew louder. Multiple high-level aides and officials in his administration either resigned or were under investigation. The New York City Department of Investigation (DOI) commissioner, an official appointed by Adams himself, described what was happening as unprecedented in the city's history. His approval ratings plunged. One poll showed only about 1/4 of New Yorkers approved of him, and many believed he should step down. Despite this, Adams insisted on staying in office. He released statements saying he would continue his duties and that he was confident in his defense. Central to the allegations were several themes that the indictment laid out: that Adams accepted luxury travel, free hotel stays and meals, provided by foreign nationals and a Turkish government official who sought to influence him, that he solicited illegal campaign donations from foreign nationals, which is banned under U.S. law, that he influenced city officials, such as the New York City Fire Department, to approve a foreign government's consulate building in Manhattan, despite a failed fire inspection, that he used those donations to secure public matching funds and other campaign finance benefits. In a twist few expected, the federal prosecution of Adams did not end in trial. In early 2025, the charges were dropped by the United States Department of Justice at the request of the then administration. The dismissal did not come with full explanations, leaving many New Yorkers frustrated. While legally Adams is not convicted, ethically and politically his standing was irreversibly damaged. For Adams, the damage went beyond his legal status. His campaign for re-election faltered badly. On September 28, 2025, he announced he would not run for a second term, acknowledging the political reality that his support had collapsed. The city's residents felt betrayed. A man who had campaigned on reform, integrity, and public safety was now fighting for survival under the weight of serious allegations. The system itself took a hit. The fact that a sitting mayor could face such charges and then have them dropped with little public explanation shook confidence in campaign finance laws, foreign influence rules, and public governance. In short, the rise of Eric Adams was fast and inspiring. The fall was steady and disheartening. He began as a symbol of hope for many and ended this chapter as a cautionary tale how power can corrupt, or at least how perception of corruption can destroy trust. If you're following this story and want to dive deeper into how the legal system, city politics, and media all played their parts in this saga, and more stories like it, be sure to have liked this video and subscribe to my YouTube channel. I bring you real-life cases from the headlines, explained simply and clearly. Eric Adams once said, "I'm perfectly imperfect, but I never stopped fighting for the city." By the end of 2025, those words carried a weight he likely never imagined when he first ran for office. What began as a story of triumph, a Brooklyn boy rising from poverty and police work to become mayor of the greatest city in the world, ended as a tale of controversy, shattered trust, and political collapse. When the federal charges were dropped, Adams publicly called it a vindication. He told reporters that the decision proved he was innocent, that the system had overreached. But not everyone saw it that way. Editorials from major newspapers like the New York Times and the Washington Post argued that, although Adams escaped criminal conviction, the evidence and testimonies revealed deep flaws in his leadership and his judgment. City agencies remained under scrutiny. His campaign team, fundraising network, and city hall appointments were all being reviewed by local and federal watchdogs. Even as Adams tried to pivot toward his legacy, the shadow of scandal refused to fade.